There's something nobody ever really tells you. Not because it's a secret, but because it's too uncomfortable to admit out loud. You're trapped. Yes, you. Right now. Not by someone else, not by a system, not even by your circumstances. You're trapped inside a life that looks like yours on the outside, but deep down doesn't feel like it ever truly belonged to you. And what's worse, you built it, brick by brick, smile by fake smile, decision by quiet compromise. Every time you said yes when you meant no. Every time you stayed silent because you didn't want to disappoint someone. Every time you shaped yourself into a version of you that would be easier for others to love, even if it meant abandoning who you really were. You didn't mean to. You were just trying to survive, to be accepted, to succeed, to be seen. But now you're here, in a reality you constructed to please everyone else. And the worst part is, they're not even watching. You've been performing for spectators who left the theater a long time ago. And yet, you keep going. Why? Because you're scared that if you stopped pretending, if you stopped chasing approval, if you let go of the image, you might look inside and realize you no longer know who you are. That's the real prison. Not the job, not the relationship, not the responsibilities. It's the loss of identity that happens when you trade your truth for control. Control of perception, control of outcomes, control of how others see you, speak about you, define you. But here's the thing, control is the greatest illusion ever sold. And you bought it. We all did. We were taught that if we managed every part of life, our emotions, our image, our plans, then maybe we'd finally feel safe, in control, enough. But ask yourself, do you? Do you feel safe? Do you feel free? Do you even feel real anymore? Or have you built a version of you so tailored to expectation that you've lost sight of who you were before the masks? And if something in you is nodding right now, if a quiet part of you feels seen, heard, remembered, let it speak. Take a breath and write this in the comments. I choose myself, and abundance meets me there. Not because I asked, but because writing it makes it real. Because putting it in words tells your mind, your body, and the universe. I'm done hiding from who I really am. Let that be your moment. Let it be your line in the sand. Montaigne, one of the most significant philosophers of the French Renaissance, from his solitary tower centuries ago, whispered a truth the world still resists. Detachment is not coldness, it's freedom. Letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And control, real control, is found only in surrender. The more you try to grip life, the more it slips through your fingers. The tighter you hold on to certainty, the more chaos you create. The more you attempt to be perfect, the further you drift from being you. So what if you stopped? Not forever, just for a moment. What if you let go of that invisible rope you're clinging to, the one you believe is keeping everything together, but is actually strangling your soul? What if, instead of clinging, you breathed? Instead of performing, you paused? Instead of proving, you allowed yourself to simply exist? Do you know what would happen? The version of you that's been buried under years of pretending would start to rise. Not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily, quietly, powerfully. Because the truth is, you haven't lost yourself. You've just stopped listening. You've been too busy keeping up with an image, maintaining a life that looks good on paper, but feels hollow at the core. And somewhere in that performance, your voice got quieter, but not silent. That voice, the one that used to dream freely, speak truthfully, move boldly, is still in there, waiting. Waiting for you to stop fighting to be liked and start remembering how to be real. It's a hard truth, I know. But here's where the shift begins. It begins in detachment. Not detachment from love or joy or meaning. Detachment from needing to be seen a certain way. Detachment from the fear of being misunderstood. Detachment from the obsession with control. Because real freedom doesn't come when you finally please everyone. It comes when you realize you never had to. And that's terrifying at first, because if you let go of all the roles you've been playing, what's left? If you stop trying to be enough for everyone, who are you without their approval? These are the questions we avoid. These are the questions that wake us up, because when you finally stop hiding behind the version of you the world applauds, you meet the version of you the world can never take away. And that version is raw, unedited, powerful. That version may not be universally liked, but they are fully alive. And isn't that the point? You weren't born to be liked. You were born to be you, to walk through this life as a living, breathing expression of your soul, not a strategy. So now you're standing at the edge the edge of the known life, the one that looks good but feels empty, and the unknown one, the one that might shake everything but finally feels like truth. And you have to choose. Will you stay where it's familiar, safe, expected, and slowly watch yourself disappear into the script? Or will you risk stepping off the stage and walking into your own life? That decision is everything. It's the first real act of freedom, and no one can make it for you. You see, when you've spent years building a version of yourself for survival, success, or approval, it's easy to forget that it was just a version, not the truth. And when life starts falling apart, when the mask starts to crack, that's not failure. That's your real self asking for space, not the curated self, not the performative self, but the one who remembers what it means to live without fear, the one who doesn't need to ask permission to speak or move or feel. That version of you has been whispering for years beneath the surface of all the noise, waiting, watching, calling you back. But here's the twist. Reclaiming that self doesn't come from adding more. It comes from letting go. Letting go of who you're not. Letting go of what never really belonged to you. Letting go of the story that was handed to you instead of written by you. You were given a name, a role, a script, and maybe no one ever asked if it fit. But now, you get to ask, you get to pause, you get to say, does this version of me actually feel like me? Because so many people are living inside a life that doesn't match their soul and calling it success. Wearing smiles they don't mean, and labels they never chose, climbing ladders that lead them further and further from themselves. And somewhere in the silence of their own thoughts, they know. There's a voice that says, this isn't it. This isn't me. That voice is not your enemy. That voice is not anxiety. That voice is your truth, trying to make its way through the cracks of your conditioning. Don't silence it. Listen, because when you finally stop running from it, you begin to hear what it's been trying to say all along. You are allowed to live a life that actually feels like yours. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to stop performing. You are allowed to let go of anything that no longer reflects who you are becoming. And here's something that's hard to admit but liberating once you do. Most of the people you've tried so hard to impress, they were never looking that closely. They weren't watching your every move. They weren't waiting to approve you. They were too busy managing their own stories to fully see yours. So what if you stopped living for an audience that's not even paying attention? What if instead you turned inward and asked, what do I want? What do I feel? What would my life look like if I stopped filtering it through fear? Because the truth is, no one's going to give you that permission. You either take it or you don't. And when you finally do, when you stop apologizing for who you are, when you stop explaining your choices, when you stop shrinking to make other people comfortable, something happens. Your nervous system exhales. Your spirit straightens its spine. Your life starts to align, not because it got easier, but because it finally got real. And real is what you've always been craving. Not more noise, not more approval, just real. Neville Goddard said, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not when it's safe, not when others agree. Now right in the middle of the unraveling. You don't wait until the conditions are perfect. You create from the state of already being. You assume the identity that feels aligned, and you let life catch up to it. That's the law of assumption. You become it within, before you ever see it without. And as that assumption settles into your being, I am free. I am whole. I am allowed to be me. Your reality begins to reflect the new author of the story. Dr. Joe Dispenza calls it coherence. When your thoughts, feelings, and energy are no longer reacting to the past, but aligning with a future you've already claimed in consciousness. That's when change sticks. That's when the shift becomes embodied, not just imagined. So, let me ask you gently but directly, what have you outgrown but keep wearing? What are you still carrying just to avoid disappointing someone? What parts of your story no longer feel true, but you're still reciting them out of habit? It's okay to let them go. It's okay to rewrite the narrative mid-chapter. You're not obligated to keep playing a role just because you've played it well. The world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your presence. And that begins when you stop editing yourself to fit inside a story that was never written for you. You don't have to keep performing. You don't have to keep earning your right to exist, to speak, to rest. You're allowed to wake up and choose a new version of yourself. Not someday, but now. That version already lives in you. You've glimpsed it in the quiet moments. You've felt it in flashes. right before the old identity rushed in to shut it down. And maybe that's what this moment is about. Not becoming something new, but finally letting go of who you never were. Neville said, "Change your conception of yourself, and you will automatically change the world in which you live. Not change your job, not your location, your self-concept. Because that's the blueprint. That's what everything else is built on. So when you wake up every day and silently assume that you have to shrink to be safe, that's the world that forms around you. And when you flip that, when you begin to embody the one who's already free, already enough, already held, everything starts to move. Not because the world changes first, but because you do. This is what the law of assumption is really about. It's not about pretending. It's not about faking it. It's about returning to the version of you that already exists inside the reality you've been trying to create. It's about starting from the end, not walking toward it, but walking as if it's already true. And this is where most people stop. Because assumption without evidence feels risky. It asks you to trust before you see. But that's how all transformation works. You assume peace, and your nervous system slowly begins to follow. You assume clarity, and your actions start making sense. You assume abundance, not to force money, but to release the grip that was blocking it. Because yes, even money begins to flow. Not because you obsessed over it, but because you stopped tying it to your worth. You stopped needing it to prove your value. You just aligned with the self who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't fear. And from that place, things open, quietly, naturally. That's how this works. Reality doesn't bend to your struggle. It bends to your state. So the more you try to control, explain, or convince, the further you move from the freedom you're seeking. But when you soften, when you drop the mask, when you assume, "This is who I am now," the path begins to appear under your feet. Not because you planned it, because you finally got in sync with the version of you that was never lost, just buried under noise. And that's the version you return to now. Not with drama, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty. Because here's what you realize when you let go of performance. Your energy is the invitation, not your resume, not your status, not your persona. It's the state you carry that speaks the loudest. You don't need to announce your worth when you believe it. You don't need to chase love when you're already rooted in it. You don't need to prove that you're whole. Only live like someone who knows they are. That's what people feel. That's what life responds to. Not your effort, but your alignment. That's what Neville meant by living in the end. Not in imagination alone, but in assumption, in identity, in energy. You don't hope for change, you become it. And yes, the old voice might still whisper. It might say, "But what if I lose everything? What if I let go and nothing replaces it?" Let it speak, but don't obey it. Because that voice isn't your soul, it's your past. And your past doesn't get to run the show anymore. This new version of you, this real version, doesn't need to fight for air. It breathes. It doesn't explain itself. It simply is. And maybe that's the greatest rebellion of all. To stop performing, to stop adjusting, to stop morphing into whatever makes you more digestible. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to be true. So let's talk about something most people hesitate to say out loud. Money. Not from ego, not from obsession, but from truth. Because here's what nobody tells you when you start waking up. The more you become yourself, the more you live in alignment, the more life responds in ways you never imagined. And yes, that includes money. But not because you chased it. Not because you forced it. Not because you manipulated your way into it. But because you became a match for it. Neville Goddard said it plainly. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you are. So if you want abundance, real, sustainable, peaceful abundance, it doesn't start with grinding. It starts with being. So now you know. You're not tired because you've done too much. You're tired because you've been holding back the truth of who you are. Every single day, you carry the weight of expectations you never agreed to, dreams that were never truly yours, and identities that served everyone but you. And the real fatigue? It comes from pretending. Pretending to care about things that don't matter. Pretending to be fine when you're not. Pretending to belong in a version of life that feels more like a costume than a home. But what if you didn't have to anymore? What if you could drop the mask, not as an act of rebellion, but as a quiet return to yourself? You don't need to burn your whole life down. You just need to stop abandoning yourself within it. And the moment you do, something shifts. It's subtle at first. A soft breath, a quiet yes. A moment where you feel your own presence more than anyone's opinion. And that's where your real life begins. Not when the noise stops, but when you stop letting it define you, because you were never here to meet expectations. You were here to meet yourself. And if you can do that, if you can stand still long enough to see yourself without distortion, then you'll understand what Montaigne tried to whisper to the world from his quiet tower centuries ago. That detachment isn't rejection, it's remembrance. That letting go isn't loss, it's clarity. And that freedom doesn't come from changing everything. It comes from no longer needing everything to change. This is the path most avoid, because it's not loud. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't fit inside the script of a perfect life. But it's real. And if you've come this far, you already know. That's what you've been craving all along. Not more success, not more admiration, just more truth. Now that the truth has surfaced, what do you actually do with it? Because insight without integration is just another distraction, another thing you know but don't live. So let's slow down. Let's bring this into your real life. Ask yourself this, and answer honestly. What part of your life feels like a performance right now? Is it your work, the way you speak in certain rooms, the things you post just to be seen a certain way? You don't need to judge it. Just name it, because you can't change what you're not willing to see. Next question, where are you still waiting for permission? To rest, to say no, to express what you really want? What are you holding back? Not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't fit the role you've been playing. And then this, who would you be if no one was watching? Strip away the performance, the pressure, the filtered identity. What would you do? What would you stop doing? What would you finally admit? These aren't just thought exercises. These are doorways, because once you know the answers, you can't unknow them. And once you see the gap between your truth and your current life, you have a choice to make. It doesn't have to be a grand, sweeping change. In fact, let's keep it simple. Step 1, make space. Start noticing the moments where you betray yourself, even in small ways. The laugh that isn't real. The yes you didn't mean. The silence when something in you wanted to speak. Don't shame it. Just notice. This isn't about fixing. It's about witnessing. Step 2. Pause before responding. When you feel that familiar pull to perform, to agree, to edit your truth, pause. Ask, who am I being right now? If the answer feels off, choose differently, even if it's just a small shift. A little more honesty. A little less pretending. It counts. Step 3. Reclaim your narrative. Neville taught that your assumption creates your reality. But what do you assume about you? Do you assume that you're fragile? That you can't say no? That your truth will cost you love? Then that's the world you'll meet. So start writing a new assumption, one you can live with, even before the evidence arrives. Something like, I am allowed to be fully myself. I am safe when I'm honest. Choose the one that makes your chest relax, not the one that sounds impressive, and speak it often, especially when the fear rises, especially when the old role starts calling. Step 4. Release the timeline. Let go of the pressure to transform overnight. This isn't a sprint. It's a process of unlearning, of shedding, of remembering. Some days you'll slip into old patterns. That's okay. That's not failure. That's data. Just come back. Again and again. To your voice. To your body. To the version of you that doesn't need to be managed, explained, or corrected. Because the goal here isn't perfection. It's presence. To be in your life fully. Not rehearsing it. Not tiptoeing through it. Living it. And the more you practice, the easier it becomes to spot the difference between who you are and who you're pretending to be. You'll feel it in your body. Tightness means you're performing. Ease means you're aligned. Listen to that. That's your compass. Now, let's talk about your environment. Where in your life are you most tempted to abandon yourself? Which relationships? Which conversations? Which spaces make you feel like you need to be less to be loved? It doesn't mean you have to cut everyone off, but it does mean you need to notice and decide, do I want to be accepted for a version of me that isn't real? Or do I want to be seen as I am, even if it costs me a little approval? Because that's the trade-off. And yes, sometimes choosing yourself will disappoint people who like the version of you that always said yes. Let them be disappointed. They'll survive. And more importantly, you'll finally breathe. Remember, the world responds not to who you try to be, but to who you are. So if you've been wondering why certain things feel off, it's probably not them. It's the mask. Drop it, just a little, and see what happens. The right people won't run. The right opportunities won't pass. In fact, when you stop dimming, the right life will finally have a chance to recognize you. And here's something else. Start small. Don't wait for a perfect moment to be real. Find one moment today. You spend so much time holding it all together, holding in the truth, holding back your needs, holding on to versions of yourself that are too heavy to carry anymore. You've been told that letting go means failure, that surrender means weakness. But what if that's the biggest lie of all? What if letting go is the exact thing that finally sets everything in motion? You keep trying to fix the story, edit the outcome, rewrite people's reactions, but the universe doesn't respond to control. It responds to alignment, to release, to truth. It's like trying to hold your breath to control the air. Eventually you suffocate, because control isn't safety. It's resistance in disguise. And the moment you let go, really let go, not in words, but in your nervous system, in your posture, in your energy, the universe feels it. It notices, not because you begged, but because you stopped pretending. That's when things shift. That's when what's truly yours stops passing you by, because you finally stopped getting in the way. You can't fake surrender. You either drop it, or you keep carrying what was never meant for you. You think the universe doesn't hear you, but it does. It's just waiting for you to stop shouting from fear and start speaking from truth. Because when your energy says, I trust, life doesn't argue. It aligns. But that trust, it only happens when you let go of needing to know how, needing to know when, needing to force outcomes that don't even match who you've become. And maybe that's why things haven't moved. Not because you're broken, but because you're trying to create a new life from the energy of the old one. You're trying to manifest peace from panic. You're trying to call in love while abandoning yourself. You're trying to welcome abundance while gripping tightly to fear. And the universe? It responds to state, not words. So if you're tired, if you've been holding on so tightly that your soul is suffocating, this is the moment to exhale, to say, I don't know what happens next, and that's okay. To trust that what's meant for you won't require begging, chasing, or pretending. To drop the timeline, to release the grip, to soften into the truth that's been there the whole time. You don't have to force what fits, and you don't have to keep proving you're ready. You already are. But the universe needs the real you to show up. Not the guarded one, not the polished one, not the performance. Just you. That's what it responds to. That's what it's waiting for. Not more effort, more you. So, if something in you is softening right now, if something inside you is finally ready to let go of what's too small, too loud, too heavy, then trust that. Trust it without a plan. Trust it without the promise of applause. Trust it because peace isn't found in knowing what's next. It's found in letting go of needing to. And maybe, just maybe, that's the exact moment the universe stops passing by and finally starts listening. If this met you where you needed it most, honor that, not by subscribing for me, but by staying connected to you. And if this space helps you do that, then subscribe as a gift to your future self. You'll find your way back when you need it, and I'll be here when you do. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you in the next one.